Louis Humphreys, who is one of our licensing managers, and I'll let you take it over, Louis.
Thank you, Doug. Yes, I'm Louis Humphreys. I'm software and IT licensing manager for TechLaunch Arizona. That means that I get to work all across the university. I'm delighted to be here today, and thank you, Victor, for asking that question. I quickly Googled Eureka to get the etymology and everything. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to answer your question right away. The reason that I was thinking Eureka is twofold. One, because we work with inventors, and so there's an association with Eureka when you start to talk about invention and the inspiration where somebody just goes Eureka. But Victor, you're absolutely right, and one of the messages that my friend Dave Allen told me to give to you all is that inventing is a grind. It's not something that all of a sudden you just have this big discovery and you go Eureka and then an invention appears. I've been working with my good friend Jerzy Rozenblit for 5 years now. There's technology that we've been working on together that is still being invented, essentially. But the other reason that I thought about this is because most of us who are licensing managers, and TLA licensing managers, please raise your hand so you can get an idea of who we are here. You can see that we've divided the room into different colleges. Each of the licensing managers represents a different college. I'm the special one, as everybody would tell you. And so one of the reasons that I thought of Eureka was because most of us believe that many of you already have invented something, but you're not aware of it. And so I wanted to use the word and the concept Eureka as an attractor, so that during the course of the day today, you might actually go Eureka yourself and realize, oh, I have an invention, and I do need to disclose this invention to one of the licensing managers. Often, for example, in software, when people develop software, they're not really thinking that the software they've created is an invention per se. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, and I'm going to also explain to you what TechLaunch Arizona does and why we're doing what we're doing and why we're here today. And then I'll turn the floor over to Jerzy. So the main thing that TechLaunch Arizona does is to provide a service to faculty and staff here at the university and students who are working on novel new ideas that really create benefit in society. And our goal is to work with you to take your technology and to transfer that technology out into society. Our sponsors who work with us have provided lunch, so we'd like to thank them for their sponsorship and the provision of lunch today. So TechLaunch Arizona does several different things. We work in tech transfer to work with inventors, to help inventors forward and further their technology. We're a service agency. We're here to provide a service. We do a lot of different things based on your needs and what you're looking for. One of the things that we do is once we've met with you and we've had a conversation with you about your technology, we provide a commercial assessment of that technology so that we can understand both what the technology is that you have, what problems it solves, and how it might be taken to market. So one of the key things about that commercial assessment is to make a determination about whether or not there's a commercial application for your technology. Often we're translating what is pure research into what might be a product and visualizing what that product might look like. In addition, we provide IP protection. That means that if we've found a novel invention that is different than anything else that's been created, and we can protect that through patenting, then we'll do that. We do a patent assessment. We determine whether or not there's room for us to file a patent application. And so you'll work with TechLaunch Arizona to go through the patent prosecution process from beginning to end. And that's a service that we provide. We pay for the patent, and the licensing managers look for licensees to license that patent to. In addition, we provide services to inventors who have technology, but they've got only so far, and they haven't created a prototype. And they need funds to get their technology into a state where they can demonstrate a proof of concept. And so we'll look at this as an asset that needs further investment in order to create interest in it in the commercial world. And finally, hey Ike, nice to see you. Finally, one of the things that the licensing managers do is once we've found a licensee, we will license the technology out into the commercial world through a license agreement. If the faculty and staff are interested in being an entrepreneur, creating a company, one of the other things that we have a lot of resources to do is to create startups. And there's a whole business development group that provide those services to you and working in collaboration with the licensing managers to facilitate the formation of the startup company, to help possibly attract business leaders who could work with the company to provide leadership and day-to-day operational guidance to the company. Usually what we're doing is we're trying to find a way to help you as faculty or staff to create a company and to keep your job here at the University of Arizona. It's really important to us that you continue to do your research, that you continue to teach, that you continue to do your job here, but you're also able to create a startup company, and we find people who can actually run the company for you. In addition, we have a really great program called I-Core, and anybody who is interested in possibly being an entrepreneur or learning more about how viable their technology is in the market, the I-Core program that we have here is a training program that basically trains you in a lean startup model, how to create a company, how to take your company's product to market, and it actually funds customer discovery. So we provide $3,000 to the team to do interviews with potential customers and get customer feedback. So if you don't know whether or not your product or your idea is viable, I-Core is a great way to do some discovery and find out. And that impact statement just gives you an idea of how many inventions that we're working with on an annual basis. People like you file an invention disclosure. All of the licensing managers who are here today would be delighted to talk to you about an idea you might have and whether or not it's ready for an invention disclosure. That's the process that initiates your engagement with TechLaunch Arizona. When you have technology that you're interested in furthering, you can file an invention disclosure with us, and that's how this whole process gets started. And then, in addition, you can see that last year we had 15 companies that the university created. So basically, we're trying to take the basic research here at the university, pull inventions out of that research, and then create social impact. That's the whole reason that we're in existence, and it's one of the reasons that I love my job and I love what I do. So you're here, you're researching, you're potentially inventing, you report the invention to us through an invention disclosure. We begin the process by taking that invention disclosure. We have staff who do an assessment of the invention and provide that assessment to you so that you can get some intelligence about what your technology looks like in today's market and where it might fit. And if we need to, we'll then file for patent protection. I also work with software, and it's not necessary to always patent the invention that you have. It's also protected by copyright law, and that's something that I help with. And then once we've decided that we're going to go forward and try and license the technology, and we're going to make our best effort to find a licensee for the patent application or for the copyright for the software, we then take a look at whether we're going to license this technology directly to the market, whether we're going to spend some time and invest in the technology and further the asset by investing funds in the technology. And then if the decision is to create a startup, we assist with the creation of the team and also the business case that would form around that team and that startup. And then finally, we license the technology into the company, either to an existing company or into a startup. And eventually, the company has an impact as it matures and grows and delivers products and services. So we have help with that. We have mentors in residence. There's a few of them here. I see Bruce is here. And there's Mike Sember. So we have 4 mentors in residence who work directly with our startup teams. So if you're interested in creating a startup, before you even have to decide that you're actually going to register a company and all of that work, our mentors get involved and provide services to the startup to give you an idea of whether or not it's worth your time and effort to create a startup. In addition, we have a network of commercialization partners who are people out in the business world who work closely with TechLaunch Arizona and on a weekly basis review the technology that's disclosed to TechLaunch Arizona and provides us feedback about where that technology might find a licensee or a market. And we also pull from a network of 1,500 experts for those people who might get involved in that startup and help the startup do day-to-day operational activities like a CEO or a business development person or marketing and so on. This gives a deeper dive of the impact that we've had here at the university in the last year. This is kind of an overview of the financial impact of our asset development program. And what I've described, essentially there were 15 different technologies last year that received an investment. The average investment was $31,000, and the total investment in improving the technology from an idea or an initial iteration into a prototype that we could then display and show to a potential licensee was $466,000. I mentioned I-Core. This is quickly an overview of I-Core. I always recommend to anybody I meet with who's got an invention, is thinking about possibly creating a startup or has definitely decided to create a startup, to go through this I-Core program. I've seen great results. From the beginning to end, there's a transformation that takes place over those 6 classes. It's actually not a huge investment of time, but you get a great outcome because you start to learn how to think and talk like a business person as you reach out to people and interact with them about your idea and your company and your invention. Our startup companies are actually much stronger for having gone through this process. Briefly, I'm going to just talk a little bit about technology that I've worked with here to give you an idea about why I'm thinking Eureka and what Eureka really looks like. And the first one is Scholarship Universe. Scholarship Universe is a license deal that I did to an existing company called Campus Logic. Many of you might be familiar with Scholarship Universe. It's a service that's provided by Student Affairs. It was actually initiated on behalf of the student body. They had a vote about 8 years ago and said, we'd like to set aside some of our tuition to develop technology that students can use. And that money was used to begin to create Scholarship Universe, which is a scholarship matching service. It actually matches scholarships directly to the person who's using the technology. And it became very successful here at the university. It became so successful at the University of Arizona that other universities started to take notice and find out about it. And I began to talk to those other universities about possibly licensing our technology scholarship universe to those universities. Meanwhile, Campus Logic, a company that provides financial aid services to universities and to students, they became aware of Scholarship Universe, and they decided to take a license to this technology. And just to, again, emphasize how Eureka is not a moment in time, they decided that they wanted to take our technology and to take it to market, but it's taken them 2 years of work to actually get it to a point where it's a commercial product. So that, when I talk Eureka and when I'm describing Eureka, it's really from this early idea you might have, but then all of the work that goes in to actually creating the invention. And a very good example of that is NeuroID. Here in MIS at Eller, one of the faculty that I work with is Joe Valicic. Joe was actually taking a call from a relative to get some bad news about a family member, and looked and noticed that his hand was shaking. And he realized that there was a relationship between his emotional state and his physiology. And so he started to explore that relationship and came up with technology that uses neural activity and the delays that are created by emotions to check the veracity of statements that people are making. Initially, he wanted to be the Google of lie detection. But over the course of time, he realized that this technology would be really good at just identifying people who might not be telling the truth. Not necessarily a lie detector, but somebody who's emotionally conflicted about the information that they're providing because their neural activity has been delayed. And then finally, one of the groups that I worked with is in CALS, very talented group of communications and media people who got together one time over beers and said it would be great to create a platform where kids could share videos and create video content, and we could make those kids documentary filmmakers. And when they first approached me and I met with them and they described their idea, I just thought, good luck, get back to me in 6 months, let's see what you've done when you've created something. And they've actually created what I think is a phenomenal product. They've created a company now, and they actually recently got their first 2 customers. But again, that was a long process from that initial Eureka idea of this might have legs to the formation of the company and the product Film Stacker. So I'm delighted today to have Jerzy Rozenblit here with us. I've been working with Jerzy, as I said, for 5 years. We first started to work together on a software project that is called ATRAP, and it tracks networks of bad guys, essentially, is one way of putting it. And we're not sure how many 3-letter agencies are using it and what they're using it for, but we know that it is being used. And so, Jerzy, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks. Great. Well, thank you very much, Louis. And before I begin, I think a big thank you to the entire TLA team. Not only do they take a significant risk in terms of investment, of monetary investment, to protect the IP, to file patents, and to basically facilitate the patent prosecution. But there's a significant amount of time that you folks all have spent with me, so this is a great opportunity to thank David Allen, Doug Hochstadt, Joanne. You've been fantastic and very patient with me. Bruce, we've been working lately on providing some business leadership for a potential startup. And of course, the one and only Louis, who's always in the moments of doubt, would give me a nudge or a kick, depending on his mood, I guess, and my mood. All in all, it's been a fantastic experience, and I'm truly grateful to all of you guys for the opportunity to translate really what we do in the lab into what we hope to see ultimately on the market, somewhere in the OR. From the point of view of research, I do have to acknowledge the endowment that I hold a chair named after Raymond Oglethorpe. He was one of the founders of AOL America. The current work is sponsored by the National Science Foundation. It's a large project under the Smart Connected Health Program, and we have very good collaborators at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'll talk a little bit about this. And of course, none of this would be possible without a fantastic team of students. Two of them are here, Mensik Hong and Akash Rao. I've worked with Mario Riojas, Chuan Feng, Liana Napalkova, and others. My partner in the medical college is a neurosurgeon, Alan Hamilton, and a partner at UNC Chapel Hill is Henry Fuchs, really a preeminent expert in virtual reality. And of course, Louis, you've been the lead on what we've been able to accomplish on the IP side. So what is this all about, really? I don't know, there's a bunch of folks down there. I don't know how well you can read this, but they're sort of pondering, hey, can I really figure this out? Do we have 98,000 patients dying due to medical errors, or is it, 98? Should we repeat them? Should we report them? What the hell should we do, right? Well, it's not much of a joke, because I think that number was decades ago, and now it's close to 200,000 people died due to, obviously, unintended medical errors. And for us, the key motivating factor behind this invention is simply the following. And if you're sort of a student of history of medicine, Sir William Osler was one of the founders of Johns Hopkins Medical School. And I think this is a beautiful quote, that diseases that harm us really call for treatments that harm less. So this is what we are after. And Louis asked me to present, obviously, what we do, but also give you, I think, a certain chronology of how we all went about this. And I hope you'll find it interesting, because I think we've had several Eureka moments, so to put it this way. So the broader context is, I come from a technology background that deals with simulation and modeling. Obviously, you all can easily relate to how complex models we are able to build now to predict hurricanes, for example. We build simulators as devices that are capable of carrying out and actually computing the results based on the models. I think aviation is the best analogy, I think, for surgery, which is essentially we build simulated cockpits in which pilots train in order to get certified in a particular type of aircraft. So I would say the last decade really has focused on has witnessed a tremendous progress in building simulation environments in medicine that provide non-patient-based training for students, residents, fellows, essentially folks who need to retrain. And I think it's a no-brainer. Well, obviously, you can practice over and over again certain procedures. You don't sacrifice animals. And there is good literature showing that simulation-based training does result in better patient outcomes in the end. So this is really the motivation. Obviously, I always use this little baby Hal, or whatever the name is of the baby, as an example. How many of you would allow, let's say, an emergency department resident to intubate your baby just to practice, right? So it's much better to practice that intubation process on a mannequin rather than on a human. So our specific focus of the CAST device that TLA has supported so generously has been laparoscopic surgery, essentially a procedure that requires a few small incisions and a couple of long instruments well, several long instruments. I'm going to pass these around just so that you could actually see what's happening here. We didn't bring the device because it's really too complicated to unhook it from our setup. But in essence, you're using these long 18-inch long instruments to perform what you would have performed in an open surgery while looking at a slightly smaller, obviously, monitor. So the key problem is really restricted vision and the lack of depth perception. So as you now imagine, you know, even in a situation like this, as you're holding this instrument, if I ask you to sign your name with it, you'd have a problem sort of with the level of dexterity and accuracy. So now imagine a surgeon basically observing a monitor and having to tie a suture while they're doing this. Now the advantages are quite clear. I mean, it's very, very quick, you know, recovery time. It's very likely that in this room there's somebody who may have undergone gallbladder removal using this technique, so you know how quickly you recover. There's much less pain and obviously loss, you know, much less blood loss, etc., etc. So the question is, you know, why did we invent what we invented? Well, what we felt was necessary is essentially to provide training tools that, again, allow you to practice in non-patient-based environment so that you develop the necessary hand-eye coordination skills and dexterity so that when you end up in the operating room, the probability and the likelihood of you making an error is much, much lower. The literature had shown that in these types of procedures, typically the first 50 operations had a higher complication rate than, you know, than it would be for somebody who has done 400, for example. To the extent that I mentioned simulation, several years back, in fact, the American Society of Gastrointestinal Surgeons developed actually a certification program called FLS that requires that anybody who will be doing this type of surgery complete these types of exercises. I'm not going to go into detail because I think, you know, it's much easier to sort of see a picture. One of the certification tasks is to carry out a peg transfer, meaning essentially you are, I'm going to activate the video here for you guys. You pick up a rubber-like implement from one peg, transfer it to another instrument, to the second instrument, and have to place it on a different peg. It appears to be very, very easy to do this in this video. I'm going to play this again. But it's extremely complicated if you're sort of just starting this type of practice. This is actually a screenshot of our device doing this with a little bit of assistance, which I will describe as we proceed. So, you know, where do we fit in this space? Obviously, we were not the only ones thinking about this, so this wasn't a big Eureka moment. The training devices sort of span the spectrum of either very, very simple, like a plastic box. I don't think that the pointer really works very well on this. But on the upper left corner, what you see is essentially a plastic box with you know, a fixture and a laptop. And you can sort of do this, these types of exercising using that. On a more sort of, on a much more sophisticated level, you have sophisticated systems that are extremely expensive, $250,000 each. And they provide some level of tactile feeling and some level of objective assessment of how well you have performed. So what you see sort of in the middle, we tried to identify, you know, what could we fit in and where is the space. And for us, essentially, we kind of started off, and this is the sort of a progress. We've had a number of small Eureka moments. And we took a top-down and bottom-up approach. So I'm a relatively abstract guy, so I think top-down. But yet, as we kind of scanned the environment, we saw a lot of opportunities along the area of software design, hardware design, mechanical design. Even, you know, mechanical design was included. And obviously, the system got so complex that it required a pretty sophisticated integration of various components. So we said, all right, what we'd like to do is to deliver a system that is simple enough, yet sophisticated. So it sort of sounds almost like kind of a contradictory two terms, but we wanted something affordable, sophisticated, portable to some extent, that would use real surgical instruments, that would essentially allow people to train on realistic scenarios using physical organ and tissue models, and integrate an ability to assist using the technology trainee in learning how to carry out these laparoscopic tasks. So this was the kind of key motivation. As I said before, it's a very, very complex process. So here's how we started, believe it or not. You know, a wooden peg, all right, and you know, a couple of, a wooden board and a couple of wooden pegs. And what you see in the upper right corner is an instrument that has attached to it a sensor that would allow us to track the movement of the instrument through that training space. And here the simple exercise was to simply just touch the top of the peg, move to the next one, move back, and so on and so on. Obviously, we were able to record the trajectory of such movements. There's no doubt in my mind that you probably would not want surgeon number 2 to operate on you, right? You see the sort of, you know, the economy of that movement is not optimal. So we went on and said, okay, well, what would we really would like them to do? Well, what we'd like them to do is to be as close to the ideal path. If for you the ideal path is obviously something, you know, like the shortest path between the tips of the two pegs, and that's computed geometrically. And as you see here, this particular trainee is pretty good. So we started off by just doing these kind of simple exercises, and I'll show you a little video. And this was done just to sort of prove the concept that, you know, we could be tracking this performance. I don't know if audio is working here. Is there an audio control that I could? Yeah, you just need it plugged in. Yeah, not that we need it here, but if we could, I think through HDMI it should be, we should be able to, you know, given, so what you see here was just a very simple exercise, but oh, thank you very much. So, you know, based on this, we could already track on this simple exercise, we could already track how economic the movement is, how quickly somebody is able to perform that exercise. We were able to see, you know, how accurate they are in terms of touching the top of the peg. Are they moving in the right direction, et cetera, et cetera. So we developed a set of metrics that would give a trainee really a set of objective criteria for how well they have done this specific exercise. Now, of course, I'm going to ask you the following question, and I think the figure might suggest it. What do you guys do when you lose track of the cursor on the screen? What do you do with the mouse? You jiggle the mouse, right? So now imagine this instrument basically inside your abdomen, right? And somebody losing track of the tip of that instrument, what do? They just jiggle the instrument. You obviously don't want this to happen. So what we said, okay, this is the next kind of Eureka moment, was the mouse and the cursor. If I could sort of refer to your small step Eureka moments, right? We said, no, this is really not right. So what we need is a no-fly zone. And we said, okay, if this is essentially the boundaries that are safe, in other words, none of the movements of your instruments are injurious to the patient, this is where you could be moving. And, you know, we sort of have to figure out how to do this. So obviously at the training level, we'd like to be able to generate these trajectories and essentially guide the trainee in terms of how to move from point A to point B without hitting an obstacle. In terms of the real-time application, and this is where ultimately my passion is, I'd like to have this system in the OR 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows how quickly we're going to progress. Hopefully quickly. In the OR, we'd like to sort of stop you from committing an error, from making a move that's injurious to the patient. And that's very, very, you know, self-explanatory. So how did we go about this? Well, we looked at robotics. If you look at a complex setup in a manufacturing, you know, auto company, you know, auto plant where you assemble vehicles, you see these robots flying through that space, taking parts together. But it's, you know, they don't do that by themselves. They essentially move along what we call collision-free trajectories that are optimal for these movements to assemble the car. And that's done by using the concept of what we call configuration space, where we compute, you know, a sort of a corridor along which the instruments could move in the best possible fashion without actually hitting any obstacles. So this is just a geometric rendering, because behind this is a set of very, very complex path planning algorithms in three-dimensional space with rigid objects like these two instruments that are floating around along the room. And there's a whole bunch of people working on these, and we work with them. We also invent our own. So just to show you sort of the next step in our progression is we graduated from the wooden blocks into Lego blocks. So this is still low tech stuff, but really good stuff because it helps. So we use this technology to provide guidance in how to move the instruments using kind of a cockpit analogy and a glide slope when you land the plane. So essentially you're supposed to move the instrument along a particular pathway, a glide path as we call it, and we just at that point with Lego blocks we couldn't provide too much. So I'm going to explain this. This is not so relevant here. Here we graduated not only to the sort of Lego block setup, but we wanted to avoid muscle memory. And we randomly would essentially light up targets for the left instrument and the right instrument. And the trainee would have 10 seconds to close the circuit and touch a metal hook at the top of these sort of valleys and peaks. And this was quite random. And as we were doing this, we were analyzing this training space, and the audio guidance systems would tell you whether to go deeper, whether to go lower, up, you know, higher, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the kind of a first attempt at providing what we would call guidance, teaching tools to sort of get you into the right path. But of course, we said this was not enough. So the next Eureka moment was, I was chatting about this with a mechanical engineer, and he said, well, hey, look, you know, I could help you design the setup. So this is the first drawing of actually the fixture that we came up with. And if I could just spend a moment or so explaining what this is. So we have a fixture for an instrument, left and right. And this fixture allows you essentially to operate in 4 degrees of freedom. You have rotation, essentially insertion, you have yaw and pitch and roll. And then each axis is connected to a servo motor that has an encoder. What do we need these elements for? The encoders give you a precise position of the instrument in the space, or they basically measure the position. The servo motors actually allow you to actuate the instrument so that in a fully autonomous mode, I could say these two instruments could tie a knot by themselves. So this was the step towards not just providing you with a sense of, you know, having resistance from tissue, but rather having a system piloting you along the surgical space. So if you think of a self-driving car, if you think of an autopilot in a plane, these are, I think, good analogies for what we have done. So we said, as opposed to the existing systems, our Eureka moment was kind of reverse, you know, the reverse Polish logic. You know, I grew up with these mathematicians. And we said, you know, he said, no, yeah, let's provide haptic guidance, haptic, you know, force as a navigation means rather than basically just a means of resistance. So this was the kind of a first picture of the fabricated element here without the servo motors at that point. But let's kind of see what we have at this point, you know, in terms of where we are with the invention. So what we have, this is what the setup looks like. This is just going to rotate. In essence, what we have is a fully instrumented device in which you could use real laparoscopic instruments that, given a particular training tasks, gives you two things at this time. One is you are to carry out, let's say you are to move the instrument from point A to B in the space to certain intermediate waypoints. If you are a perfect trainee, the system will basically just observe and monitor what you're doing. The more you veer off from where you should be, the system will nudge you back on the trajectory along which you should be moving your instruments. So this is the principle here. It's quite simple. So in a way, it's almost like the lane-keeping assistance in your modern car. If you're sort of veering off the steering wheel a little bit, you will see that there's a servo motor that actuates the steering wheel and will get you back into the lane. Why is it good? Well, I think it's quite good, actually. I'll tell you a little bit. I don't know how much more time I have, probably 5 minutes or so. Yeah, excellent. So, I hope to have a good discussion with you all, folks. I'll just tell you about some, not anecdotal, but actually pilot studies that we have done. But then I had a second, maybe a revelation. Okay. So the next Eureka moment was when I got into a rental car. My cars are, pretty old, but I got into a rental car, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And I put it in reverse, and I see camera image of what's behind the car with a set of grid lines. I don't know if you have ever sort of analyzed those grid lines, but to me it was really a revelation. Maybe because I'm sort of actually a pretty good three-dimensional thinker, so I should have become a dentist and maybe worked on teeth using a mirror, but to me it was very intuitive. Not only did I have the grid lines that showed me how far back I had been, basically from the obstacle behind me, but I also had the grid lines that ran parallel to the body of the car, and then I quickly figured out that these grid lines are really what gives me the width of the car. So if I want to squeeze into a very narrow space, I could do that. And that was very cool. I said, hey, we got to do this. We got to do this for this. Because all of a sudden I found myself actually putting the cars in reverse and almost driving backwards. I really truly enjoyed it. It gave me immediately a much better situational awareness perception. And that's what's done in cockpits with heads-up displays too. So what we did is we did initial stuff, we said, I am generating the trajectory using the mathematical algorithms for path planning. This is the line along which the instrument should move. So why don't I overlay the image from the camera with these sort of renditions of the trajectories? Believe me, it's not trivial at all. First of all, you have to have pixel registration. Secondly, what symbology do I use? What is a good way of actually representing that? And that's a human factors problem. And I don't have a very good answer yet, but I'm working with UNC people, really prominent people in virtual and augmented reality who hopefully will have, well, I'm sure we'll have something very, very funky using maybe even the sophisticated technology as a HoloLens. So you will see some demos in a second. But in the end, we ended up with the following, that really the major components of what we have, the system, is we call it OPT-MIS, which is the collision-free path generation along which, trajectory generation along which the instrument should move. The visual and haptic guidance is what I have just discussed. And we also have performance evaluation. So we have pretty good techniques that in the end allow you to see how well you have done, how well you have progressed over time. And now what we're doing is we're incorporating that sort of knowledge into an adaptive mechanism that provides assistance based on how, an individual trainee has done. So it's sort of personalized training. If you're exhibiting some difficulty with a particular training task, you have a problem maybe, moving around the obstacle, the system will detect that and it will provide more assistance along that line. So it's really customized training assistance. Okay, I'll do a little demo video so you get a sense for how things work. And this is just sort of a good visual since I don't have the instrument here. Obviously, you're more than welcome to visit our lab and play. You won't be, well, you won't kill anybody, and that's a good thing, and you'll have a lot of fun. So, by the way, these are the replaceable cassette scenarios. We could just put any cassette with a training setup, like a vignette. Here's just a blocks world where we are moving the instruments. I think it's Akash right there, right? He's a very good one. So he's moving the instruments. And this is almost like a Pac-Man type of game. If he's ideally on the path that virtual augmented reality rendition disappears as he's moving along. See, the key is, and we really are still refining these techniques, the key is what is the best representation to give you a sense of depth perception and better orientation in that space. So our next video, I'm just going to move this along, shows you a different representation. Here we are using three-dimensional cubes with a sort of a point of reference. You see that little kind of a leg. And in our pilot study, it was amazing how well people react to this kind of virtual overlay, how well they have done in the pilot study. You know, it's almost night and day. If I had taken a random person, if I invited you today, I don't know, have you ever done this?
No, I haven't.
No, you'd be a great subject. So essentially, most likely your first trajectory would look all over the place, you know, a huge amplitude of movements. Once we give you this overlay, you'd be very, very close. And of course, so you can easily guess that what we do, this is another setup here. It's a little more sophisticated training exercise where you have a lot of curvature around the object. So you can easily guess that what we assess is, I would assess you, one, without any, you know, how well you have performed without any assistance. Two, I would switch the force assistance, so the servo motors would nudge you in the right direction, and I would also turn on the visual assistance, which basically, and we could sort of cross-compare how well you have done without assistance, with one type of assistance, or both, right? And, you know, what are we doing right now? Oh, this is really, I have to show you this. This is really a nightmare, okay? This is our latest. We call it a wire training task. So you have a loop that has to be moved perfectly along a wire without touching the wire. And I tell you what, doing this even with having that perception is not trivial, let alone looking at the monitor and manipulating. It's a very, very difficult task. So we're working on this. And what we are essentially, as I said, you know, we're refining the control algorithms that are in process. We're refining the visual, and we're adding audio guidance. We are experimenting with, you know, how well actually people react to audio signals. If you know how the pilots kind of operate, actually there's quite a bit of audio assistance in the cockpit as well. So we're going to assess this. So, concluding remarks. Yeah, I'm sure you have seen all of this, but maybe we could do the poll here and say, would you let the robot operate on you by itself? So what I'm trying to justify here is that what we're really trying to accomplish is perhaps to remove some of the anxiety from, you know, what is, I believe, ahead of us. If you know, and we monitor calls for proposals all the time, because obviously we want to fund the development of the system through grants, etc. So the new stuff that's coming out is what is now called human technology frontier. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard about the Da Vinci robot that's used extensively in, you know, high precision operations, urological, gynecological. Some of it is used in thoracic procedures. But the robot at this point is an extension of the human operator. But what funding agencies are exploring now is the kind of human technology frontier interface where I think to a large degree, a lot of the technology will have a high level of autonomy in collaborating with the human operator. Is this going to put the physicians out of business? I don't think so, but it'll provide a lot of the sort of highly cognitive, I think, support that might be quite useful. So this will be very, very interesting to see. Just to wrap it up, obviously, it's a fascinating stuff for me. I'm sort of the integrator here because, as I mentioned, we deal with the mechanical components, electronic components, very, very complex control algorithms to provide the movement of the instrument with the human in the loop. See, if I'm controlling temperature in this room, unless you blow a hairdryer on the thermostat, the thermostat sort of measures the temperature and turns on and off the HVAC. If I have this instrument and I have a jittery person with a jittery hand, or they react because there is stress, so now all of a sudden they're not as smooth as they should be. For us to adapt the system to a human who is inherently unpredictable is not so easy. And of course, in the end, if we deploy this system, and I hope that we do in some incarnation, in the OR, this is really a life-critical computing system. This is a system that requires absolute reliability and sort of triple backups in order to be deployed safely in the system. So is this the future? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see how it goes. So again, thank you so very much for the opportunity to share that with you.
So we've got a few minutes for questions. If anybody has a question for any of us at TLA or for Jerzy, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like near the end, this force feedback and visual cues feedback is not just for training, but eventually would be done on the patient.
I very much would like to see that, yes, with the appropriate safeguards. So if the robot gets upset because it gets tired, it doesn't kill the patient. I'm only quipping, but the fear of AI these days, that the robots will start flying on their own or something. But indeed, we would like to have that sort of human technology frontier sort of integrated in a sort of a two-way manner, not just as an extension of the human operator.
One of the features that was contemplated with this technology was actually to create a social network of physicians who could all share their techniques and methods. So the software could actually record the procedure and the specific technique that the person used. And so you could download from the cloud what the most advanced surgeons use as far as their technique, and the machine would provide haptic feedback to allow you to feel what it feels like for, say, the foremost throat surgeon who's working on some of the greatest voices in the world, but you aren't looking over their shoulder, you're actually feeling what it is they're doing.
Questions? A few.
Thank you for the nice talk. As I was watching this, I came to a suggestion that this is a lot like learning. This is like learning how to shoot a pistol, hand-eye coordination. Now it doesn't matter. It does not have to do with how good a basketball player you are, or how good a surgeon you are in this case. It's going to have to do with something else, because Shaq never could make 50% of his free throws, and Steve Nash made 95% of his during his career. So what's the difference? They both had the greatest coaches in the world, blah, blah, blah. So what? So the question is, how are you going to deal with the natural human variability in hand-eye coordination?
Okay, I'm trading off how to be diplomatic, politically correct, or incorrect. Okay.
Don't have to be diplomatic and insult me.
No, you're all nice people. Ultimately, it's like with anything else. Certain people become, concert violin players because they have a certain degree of aptitude and skilled to do this. Certain people go into surgery, certain people go to psychiatry. So the key presumption here is that by the time that these folks end up here as surgical trainees, we allow them to hone their skills in a setting that allows them to do this over and over and again without having to sacrifice an animal, without having to have Doug as an expert surgeon to stand over their neck essentially for hours because they don't have the time to do it. And one more thing, you know, in countries that are less developed than ours, literally students are so hungry to be able to do this. So they buy a shoebox, they buy a web camera, and they borrow an instrument from the hospital or they train at home because they don't have the simulation lab. So, you know, I'm not here to sort of argue that if somebody is hopeless and will never be able to operate in a three-dimensional space, that this device will make them do that. It's more of a, you know, an assistive tool to develop skill sets without injuring anybody in the process. And, you know, you could also look at it the following way. We have some really passionate young kids coming from a high school who are literally like a human sewing machine when they use this instrument first time around. Isn't that not a good way to encourage them, hey, you know, maybe you should become a surgeon because you have a great hand, you know?
It's an interesting point, Victor, because that's the Eureka moment that Jerzy's collaborator, Dr. Alan Hamilton, had. A lot of physician error is responsible for death, for injury, for increased time in recovery. And so that was really what instigated this whole invention.
Yeah, if I may, this is great. It just well, must have turned it off. You know, one more thing is, I think surgery is very much like aviation. It's all or none. In other words, you know, if you don't extend the flaps, you're going to crash on takeoff. So if this device or these types of devices find their way into real-time support of certain procedures, humans are humans. There's fatigue, there's confusion, there could be unexpected events. If there is some recognition that an impending disaster might happen in the system where through a servo motor may stop you from cutting a common, you know, bile duct or something during the gallbladder removal, you really might actually benefit quite a bit.
Great. Yeah, one more question and then we'll close up.
Who is the funding for research including patent applications?
Oh, this is very good. Well, as I said, you know, TLA had been incredibly generous in taking care of the patent. And obviously, you know, the time that they spent with me, and he knows that I'm intractable in some sense. To some extent, I'm tractable. I showed up today, right? So that was TLA. And I have to tell you, to get it to the level of funding that we got it in right now, we had to invest quite a bit. And, you know, I'm very fortunate to have an endowment from Mr. Oglethorpe that provided the seed money to build a prototype. Once we had the prototype and preliminary pilot studies with the data that actually this makes sense, we were able to win the large NSF grant. Yeah.
Does that answer your question? I hope everybody understands that if you do have an invention that we'd like to talk to you, if you'd like to speak with any of us, we'll hang around after the session. Is anybody here considering talking to us? You're so shy. I'm going to encourage you to reach out to us. And the whole purpose of the event today was to let you know that you, in fact, are potential inventors. Many of us think that you already are inventing and you're not aware of it. So we encourage you to work with us. Thanks for coming today. That's great.
Yeah.